All right, everybody, we are back again for another episode of the Coach's Compass. As always, don't know what episode it is, right? Because we just continue to bring on dope guests and continue to go ahead and give you guys some knowledge and advice on how to navigate through this world of strength and conditioning and sports performance. And as always, hit that like, comment, subscribe button down below so we can go ahead and continue to get this thing to continue to grow. It's your boy, Coach Coop, my boy Jay. We're reporting live all the way over here from Europe. And we got another special guest with us today. We got our boy, Usama, head strength and conditioning coach for the Toronto Argonauts, owner of the 5-4 Performance clothing brand Feed the Fam FTF from the UK, former football player for Sheffield University and the Sheffield Giants. Also studied for one of the renowned school branches of the Russell Group at Sheffield University. Now, his background is a little crazy, but we're going to let him tell them all about it. But Usama, welcome, and thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you, man. Appreciate you guys for having me on. It's an honor, and I'm looking forward to chopping up with you guys.
For sure, bro. First of all, before we even get into the background, what is Usama doing differently than all the other coaches in this industry that's setting you apart from them?
Man, I think if you really want to understand that, just ask any of the athletes that I train. The biggest thing right now that I'm doing is I understand that strength and conditioning is basic and simple, and if you do the basics and the simple stuff right, you're going to get it right. The biggest thing that separates me, though, is the culture that we have, not only in our weight room here at the Toronto Argonauts, whenever I'm training any of my private athletes too. Culture is everything for me, making sure that the athletes understand why we're doing what we're doing, so they're empowered with the knowledge, so that they go out there into the real world, which is full of, less than savory advice for individuals trying to be more athletic, and they're empowered with the knowledge that I've given them. And yeah, man, the biggest thing for me is culture. Culture matters more than anything else.
So we talked a little bit off air that you started off in chemistry. I don't even know what kind of chemistry you're talking about.
Chemical engineering.
Chemical engineering, right?
Yeah.
How did you go from chemical engineering to the strength and conditioning field?
Man, so yeah, it was an interesting story. I got to give out a shout to, Simon Vardy. He was at the time when I played for Sheffield University as a football player. He was our defensive coordinator at the time, but he was also the head strength and conditioning coach and the head of performance at the University of Sheffield. So I remember I went in while I'm studying to be an engineer, thinking, that's my life. I'm going to be an engineer. I don't know if you're aware about this, but like the Bengali, Pakistani, Indian community in general in the UK and in all other spaces in the world, we're really taught that, man, the only careers for you are being a doctor, being a lawyer, being an engineer. Like, basically, it's funny because my brand's called that, but basically whatever will feed your family, you do that and you don't care about anything else. So that's why I studied engineering. But, Simon, who's a good friend of mine now, we're chopping it up just about how to make myself more athletic, because I wanted to be, the best product on the field for my team that I could possibly be. He just told me, look, I'll do you one better rather than giving you a program and stuff like that. Why don't I teach you how to program? Because then I need some help in the weight room, but then also you help yourself and you're empowered with that knowledge. So, I took a couple of basic strength and conditioning qualifications, started reading up a lot on it, and then started interning for him at the University of Sheffield. About a year later, he gave me a couple of my own teams. I worked with men's basketball, women's netball, women's cricket, just a bunch of different university varsity teams. And man, I just found that, honestly, it wasn't that strength and conditioning or coaching was getting in the way of engineering. It was that engineering was getting in the way of strength and conditioning. And, I don't know if I should be admitting this, but I'm going to do it anyway. Like, we have 25 hours of in-class time at the University of Sheffield every single week for engineering, about 25. I went to class maybe 2 hours out of every 25 a week. And all of my classmates can attest this, because I was in the weight room, I was in the strength and conditioning room, just learning, coaching, training myself, doing everything I could possibly do to make sure that once I realized I wanted to be a strength and conditioning coach, make sure that that was the path that I took. So yeah, man, that's basically how I ended up making the switch. I worked as an engineer for a year, hated it. Again, I was honestly waiting for the day to end so I could go and coach the athletes that I was working with. I just realized then, like at the end of the day, God's given me gifts in strength and conditioning and coaching and relationships with people. How am I going to go to him, when this is all over and he's going to list all the gifts that he gave me? I'm going to say, yeah, I just made my money and I was an engineer. I didn't do anything with what he gave me. I can't do that. I won't do that. So I decided to be a strength and conditioning coach full time.
And that's a lot of hours too, man, because you go from engineering, working that full time, and then you go over to strength and conditioning, right? You got to put in a lot of hours with your athletes too. And I'm guaranteeing you're sitting there while you're doing engineering, you're also programming out stuff too for your athletes. Yeah, so you're more focused on the strength and conditioning side, but then it also leads you to now over to Canada, right? Like that's a big jump coming from the UK of just working with all those different types of athletes, but then now you're working with just strictly Canadian football, which I guess if a lot of our listeners don't know, Canadian football is a different game than just the NFL.
Oh yeah,
you know what I mean? Because you got people that are running full speed already by the time they hit the line of scrimmage, right? The field is also wider. The field is also longer when in the end zones. The field goal post is at the front. Like there's so many different aspects to it. How did you get there?
I think the one thing you miss also is that the offensive line and defensive line are a yard away from each other too.
Yup.
The offensive game way more exciting because they always have that little almost run up into the D line. So it's definitely a fast game and it's growing. But just a quick fact, if you didn't know, the football field in Canada, I believe, is something like 3,000 square foot bigger, or something crazy like that compared to the NFL field. So the amount of running that you would do as a pro athlete is just incredible in the CFL compared to the amount that you would do in the NFL. But yeah, man, how I made it over to Canada was it's definitely an interesting story. So long story short, I don't ever really quit anything that I sign up to do. I'm always very committed to whatever I do. I signed up to do a master's in engineering. So after my year in industry, I came back to the University of Sheffield, played for another year, was coaching, but I also did my master's. I met my wife in that year, or I didn't know she was going to be my wife in that year, but I met her, Rachel. We ended up getting married kind of towards the end of that year. So when I was graduating, I knew her for 6 months, and then we ended up getting married. So that was a little bit of a crazy story in of itself. She ended up getting a PhD at U of T, so the University of Toronto in Canada, to study sports psychology. So that's what she was coming over here for. I knew I always wanted to go to North America in general because I knew, one, the sporting infrastructure there was just way more set up for a career in strength and conditioning. But I also knew that my head strength and conditioning coach actually at the University of Sheffield, Simon Vardy, had introduced me to Canadian football. So I knew about the Toronto Argonauts, while I was in the UK. We got over to Toronto, and this thing was the only place I wanted to work, to be honest with you, because it's football. It's what I love. Football ended for me as a player. I knew that I wanted to be in football as a coach, and I knew I wanted to be a strength and conditioning coach. So, this really was the dream. I moved here in 2018 with Rachel, and then the way I ended up getting into this role was, and if you haven't done this, I recommend that if you're an up-and-coming coach, this is what you do. I still have in my inbox, I guessed the email for every single CFL, every member of staff from the GM all the way down, for every single one of the 9 teams. I did the same for the NFL, same for the NBA. I just wanted to get in pro sport at the time. I knew I wanted to work in football, but I knew I needed to be in pro sport. So while I was working, in my spare time, I was just finding ways to basically, I would Google, hey, where are the Toronto Argonauts going to be? Where's the training camp? Just turn up randomly, not get very lucky. What ended up happening was the head athletic therapist, who's a good colleague of mine now, he's still the head athletic therapist at the Argonauts, Josh Shaw. He was the only one that responded back to me from all those emails that I guessed. And he basically just told me, we don't have any opportunities for you, unfortunately. We have a strength and conditioning coach. So at the time, I was working 3 jobs, trying to pay the rent, doing anything I could to, really separate myself as a strength and conditioning coach, finding athletes on the football field that I could work with. I ended up finding my good brother now, Kian Schaefer-Baker. He's a wide receiver at the Saskatchewan Roughriders. I started training him through a connection. And effectively, he was my first CFL athlete. I trained him for the combine. He jumped 40 inches at the combine, and honestly, it was over with after that. Like, people started to understand, okay, maybe this guy Osama kind of knows what he's talking about. But yeah, basically, what happened was after those couple of emails saying there's no opportunities for you, one day I just decided, you know what? It's funny, we had $100 left on our credit card. That was it. Like, we didn't know how to pay the rent at the time, nothing, but we had $100 left on our credit card. Josh messaged me and told me, hey, the Toronto Argonauts are practicing at this facility. If you want to, come by and I'll introduce you to the head strength and conditioning coach at the time. So I looked at my wife and said, hey, we got enough money to rent a car for the day. Are you good if we do this? Yeah, absolutely. Rented a car, went up there, introduced myself to him. I said, look, my name's Osama. I'm willing to help. However, can I please just come down and just watch you do your thing? Like, I won't be a nuisance. I just want to watch you do your thing. I came the next day. They were at a different field. Hey, you got to have, excuse my language, you got to have balls when you do stuff like this. Obviously, it's not recommended to do stuff like this all the time, but when it works really well. I went up to the head coach at the time, and I just stood on the field and just pretended like I was an intern. I went right up to him, shook his hand, because obviously the head coach doesn't know what's going on, right? They don't know who's who.
They ain't pay that much attention.
The players, right, and the coaches, so they don't know the interns. It's like down their first day of camp. I went up to him and I said, hey, my name's Osama. I'm one of the strength and conditioning interns. He said, absolutely, brother. Yeah, welcome. And I just kind of stood there for the rest of camp. Yeah, man, that happened. The head strength and conditioning coach at the time, he offered me an opportunity to work at his private facility. So I was a strength and conditioning coach at his private facility working with youth athletes. That's where I met Kian, my guy out in Sask. I trained him for the combine, did really well there. COVID hit. I started training guys for free outdoor. And the guy that I ended up training just happened to be the starting quarterback at the time for the Toronto Argonauts in 2021. I told him, look, I got a great receiver here. You can throw to him if you'll let me train you for free. So it's a win-win for him. We're out in the summer just training, working out. 3 months goes by. We're doing speed work. He gets a lot faster. And then he calls the new head coach at the time, Ryan Dinwiddie, who's now my boss, and just says, look, there's this strength and conditioning coach. I know we don't have one right now. Is there any possibility of bringing him in? Ryan Dinwiddie calls me and he says, look, we don't have any money right now. We don't have it in the budget to pay for a strength and conditioning coach. Can you just come to camp and just run our stretch period and help us out with some workouts? And I said, coach, you don't have to pay me. I've been dreaming of this opportunity. Let's go. Let's do this. And long story short, I was there for a month in camp. My goal was just to make it seem like if I left, that there would be a big hole. So I was trying to help everyone out. Any department that needed help, I'm there. Hey, I'm really here. So end of camp, the GM, Pinball Clemens, I guess they really liked the work, thankfully, thanks to God. They liked the work that I was doing. They basically offered me the role full time, and since 2021, that's where I've been, man. I've absolutely loved it.
The fucking grind, bro. You talk about getting it up out the mud, bro. Fuck it, I'm just gonna show up to training camp. I'm the new intern. What's up, coach? And then just roll and train. That's what almost 3 years of training people for free before you even get a paid position. You're training youth athletes at the private gym, but now you're also training professional guys for free. A lot of coaches don't know how much it takes to even get to the level that you're at. You're talking about months of just scraping the barrel, trying to find a way to get to where you're at. And now you're here, bro. Congratulations to you, bro. That's huge to do what you did and then to get in this position. How does it feel to be in this spot?
Man, see, and this is something you hear me say a lot. First and foremost, I'm grateful to God, because at the end of the day, opportunities, somebody used to tell me jobs are like buses. When you're looking for one, they never come. When you stop looking, they all come at once. And I remember at the time when I was grinding, and I really want to give this advice to anybody who's a young strength and conditioning coach, is when I was grinding, barely making rent, and then going and coaching athletes for free. And I'd see people on IG working with X, Y, and Z, doing stuff. And I'm just man, I'm working just as hard. I know just as much as people. Why am I not there? and you have that like taste of bitterness in your mouth, and you're sitting there being like, man, that should be me, that should be me. Paul was pointing the finger without ever looking internally, like, yo, your time is gonna come, like you just gotta wait. But it's not about sitting and doing nothing. Like that waiting comes with a lot of work. It's a lot of mental work to work for free and not really show your heart to these athletes that like, yo, I'm really struggling. Like this is tough for me. But I know when it changed for me was when my heart changed. Like initially when I came to Canada, I was like trying to be the youngest head strength and conditioning coach in pro sport. I was trying to be the guy. I was this, that, and the other, all these accolades. And when I stopped chasing that, man, I was just like, you know what? Yo, whoever's in front of me, that's my portfolio. That's who I'm going to work with. And these are the people that I'm going to make as great as I could possibly be. When that happened, bro, things started to change. Because when that happened, I know they saw a mindset shift. When they saw a mindset shift, they started telling other people that, yo, this guy's really just about the work. Like, he don't care about anything else. I'm like, I work 7 days a week now. Like, I love what I do. If you don't work 7 days a week, I don't blame you. But that just really means you don't absolutely love what you do, man. And I love this shit. Like, I live for this. And I'm grateful that I get to do it every day. And because of that, I'm thanking God every single day for the opportunities that I'm given. I always remember where I came from. I always remember, like, my parents were immigrants. They struggled. My dad always taught me that, like, the true role of a man is never doing what they want to do, but always doing what they have to do. And that's really when I started doing that, man, that's when these opportunities came up. So my biggest thing right now, you asked me how I feel, like I feel the same as I felt back then. Like it's still the same energy. It's still the same passion. Yeah, I can make rent, thanks to God. Now I can make rent. But like outside of that, if I don't keep doing this and elevating every single day, really, like, what am I doing? I'm just going to be one of those guys that I was looking at like, yo, why are they where they have to be? Like, and my biggest thing right now is I think a lot of as I made my way up to this position, and I know there's still a lot of growth left to do, I had some people help me, but I had a lot of people stop me in my tracks. And what I don't want to be, I had university strength and conditioning coaches. I remember this too. I would go up to universities and say, I want to be a head strength and conditioning coach. They would look at my master's in engineering and say, nah, if you didn't go to a school for kinesiology, you'll never be a head strength and conditioning coach. People told me, you won't be a head strength and conditioning coach until you're 30. This, that, and the other. And I'm just sitting there being like, man, hopefully now I'm in this position. Let me never put limits on someone else like that ever again. Like, I just find that crazy when people use that kind of language. Like, you're going to put limits on me? You don't even know me. Like, that's crazy that you would put limits on me. And I just found that, like, the biggest lesson from being here is if I can help one young strength and conditioning coach that's 22, 23, believe in themselves that, now you don't have to wait till you're 30. You just got to wait till it's your time. And your time is going to come, like, whenever. You really don't have any control over that. Like, that's the biggest thing. If I can do that, then I'm successful for sure.
Man, that's what's up, bro. Because like, there's a lot of young cats out there that are trying to get to the position that you're in. Even, and maybe it's not even working at the pro level, being a head strength and conditioning coach for a team, but just working with professional athletes, right? So hearing that you have to actually start from ground zero, because you look at a lot of people. I take Gold Feet Global for example. My
Right.
boy Tevin down there, right? I remember when I was going into the league, I trained with him for a couple of times for free. And I was like, bro, like the work you're doing is worth way more. Then he went to, he was only charging $20 a session.
Right.
And he's got all these pro guys, and now you look at him now, like sponsored by Adidas, NFL dudes flying him out, right?
Yeah.
Working all over the country. And like also now you, bro. Like you're one of the guys that people come to. Like I look at your off season stuff, like you got dudes working with you. Like and you got dudes from the UK that are looking up to you. You got KG, you got Glenn, you got Rico, you got dudes that are like coming to you. So bro, like what you're doing is fucking phenomenal, bro. So don't ever let that be passed over. But on top of that, what are some of the biggest differences that you're seeing with your Canadian athletes compared to the athletes in the UK?
So I think like we spoke off camera about this a little bit, but I just kind of want to reiterate like the way I see it, like there's really two gaps in the UK that need to be filled in order for that infrastructure to come up. And the number one gap, at least in football, is the infrastructure just isn't set up for success. Like, honestly, outside of the football players themselves, it just seems like nobody really cares about football. So whether that's a like exposure thing or whatever it is, like I know coaches in the UK are grinding to try to make sure that the product in the UK is elevated every year. And just an example of one of the coaches that is a good friend of mine is George Foster. I don't know if you guys know him. He's coaching for the Manchester Titans, also does some coaching for GB. Like, I speak to him on a regular basis, and like coaches are out there grinding, really trying to set this infrastructure up. But from a government perspective, it's just really not there. Like, there's no funding for this kind of stuff. And as a result, the grassroots of football out in the UK, you don't really know where to go to get training. And if you do, most of the time you can't afford it. Like, it's just not feasible for a lot of athletes to be able to do it. So a lot of athletes are now looking online to train and stuff like that. But don't get me wrong, man. Like, if you see some of the football players that come out of the UK, there are some dogs, like straight up dogs. And you want to talk about it, some of it in the NFL, some of it in the CFL with me, like, there really are, like, the product of football that's coming out of the UK is elevating every second. And with the NFL Academy, like, it's only getting better, right? But I just think from the grassroots level, there needs to be some sort of structure. The youth football in the UK just isn't really a thing. Again, there needs to be some structure developed. And like, look, I don't want to speak out of turn because I'm out of touch. I'm 6 years removed from being in the UK, right? So I don't want to really speak on something that I don't know about. But from my experience back there, it was like, even at the university level, when I was playing, you play football if you really want to play football. You don't play football because you know about football. Like, because it's being put in front of your face or nothing like that. So, I think some teams are doing it well with like live streaming and everything like that. But the biggest thing here is, and Canada and U Sports has some growth to do too, because they don't, advertise it nearly as much as it does, down south in the States either. Like, you got thousands and thousands of people going down to watch a Friday night lights game at a high school in Texas. Like, more people than you would in a CFL game. Sometimes more than some, like, English football, like, stadiums. You got in Texas, you got stadiums filled out, people watching high school football plays. And yes, the talent is incredible there, but it's not like the talent isn't incredible here or in the UK either. It's just that isn't an infrastructure like that. Kids don't know where to go train. Kids don't know where to access those resources. And like, really, there isn't that many. So, that's definitely one of the goals of mine, is to, however I can help, just definitely help build the infrastructure. And I think one of the things that we said here in Canada, if someone is doing combine training here in Canada, the school doesn't pay for that. Quite rarely does the agent pay for that. I know in the NFL it's different. So I got kids sometimes that will train with me privately for their combine. Bro, they're going and getting a job just to pay for that training. And they have a different job to pay for whatever rent. And it's really a grind. Like, they're getting no sleep, they're getting no rest. No, they're getting a different job to go pay for the food that they got to eat. Like, it's really, but they're willing to do it. And I think it's because for them, they see from Canadian news sports, they see the definite, like, hey, what's next for me? It's, if I do well enough, it's the CFL. I think that might be the thing that's missing in the UK. It's like, man, if you're a baller in the UK, it's like, okay, yeah, what's next for me? Where's the education on what's next for me? Like, where do I go? Because if you know where you can go, I think the motivation is going to be much higher.
Yeah, I know that's tough to bridge that gap, especially when you talk about, I mean, university level, you got NFL Academy, you also got Bristol Pride, you got Manchester Titans are pretty good, and you got, UWE has been rolling through, but they're bringing in a bunch of American dudes.
Yeah.
And a few other university teams are doing well. But it's tough when you also talk about the grind, because if you even look over here in Europe, like, that grind to get to, the highest level, even getting to college, is completely different, because most of these countries that we're in over here, college is for free. So why am I going to continue to play football, bang up my body, when I can just go, live a regular life and go to college for free over here, when some of these cats over here want to go play Division I in the States, but they don't know what it takes. So what are you doing? Like, how are you helping yourself to bridge that gap, to get people to understand, and also showing them, because now there's the ELF, right? You also
Yeah.
can go play in the GFL, right? Leagues that are actually paying these UK guys for specific, but also these guys from other countries. How are you helping bridge that gap and get guys to understand, like, hey, like we do this little bit of training, like there is another level for you guys.
I think the biggest thing, to be honest with you, from a strength and conditioning perspective, and I know you guys feel me on this, is look, whenever I've seen a UK guy come from the UK to the CFL, right? They come with a lot of strength training background, like huge strength training background. That's great. That's awesome. You've been in the weight room. I can see that. That's awesome. But two things happen. One, they don't watch film the way they watch film over here. They don't do that. So generally, the football IQ is going to be limited because you're playing on instinct. Because back in the UK, the instinct can get you to a really high level. But being able to watch film, understand coverages deeply, understand like adjustments, basic things that like, are being taught here and in the States even more. That stuff is the thing that really limits guys from playing time. Is we see you in a weight room, we see you doing your thing, but we don't really see you, like, because coaches have access, they can see how much film time you got. And if you go out there, especially here at least, as a global, if you go out there and you make one mistake, man, that's it. You can't make a mistake out here because they already don't trust that you can do it. So you got to make sure that you got your head watching film, like you understand the nuances of the game of football, whatever position you play at. Because if you understand it, the game comes at a totally different speed to you. And that's one of the things that I learned from here. Like, a basic example is, man, I heard near foot, near shoulder, I kid you not, near foot, near shoulder tackling technique the first time when I was in Canada. I never
That's
heard it in
wild.
the UK. Like, that's crazy, right?
That's like a basic tackling technique.
That's
Really,
such a
like
fundamental thing, but it's not being taught. So that's one thing. But I think the second thing, like you said, guys have a lot of strength training experience, but man, you come to Canada, you go to the States. You guys have seen it. Kids are running track from like 6 years old, bro. Like, kids are competing in track from 6 years old. I'm not talking about playing football. Like, we have pros here, some of the best on our team that didn't play football till they were 16. Right? It's not about necessarily just play. Guys play basketball, so they learn how to size people up, and now they take that to the D line. Similar types of movement. They know how to read their opponent. It's transferable skills. It helps. Damn near all of the fastest guys on the team run track from a very young age. So what I would say is, like, the physiological development that you get from sprinting is unlike any exercise you could get. So I know myself in the off season, I was lifting a lot, but I wasn't really sprinting or speed training like that. And not only the reduction in injury risk from sprinting, because what do you do out on the football field? You sprint, but also the athleticism from sprinting, cutting regularly, it matters. But I feel like in strength and conditioning generally in the UK, we don't really do that a lot. In the off season, we don't really do that. Guys are in the weight room, they're getting stronger. And I get that there's a base level of strength that you need to achieve to be able to play the game of football. But if you have strength and you're not building skill off of that, like, what are you really doing? We got guys out here doing, in the off season, skill work 3 days a week. We got guys in the UK doing skill work. They go to practice once a week. That's when they get their skill work.
jeez.
And
So
that's crazy.
on top of that, like with your athletes that are there, like the pro athletes you're working with, like what are some like the top deficiencies you see them come in with, like hip displacement? What are you like? What are some things you're seeing?
So I think the biggest thing, obviously, as the game has developed over the last, I don't know how many years, but multiple decades, to be honest with you. Obviously, you've had, 20, 30 years ago, you had 5, 6 guys that you could identify that are like, whoa, that is game breaking speed. But they were touching 22, 23 miles an hour. But bro, like, every athlete can touch that now. Like, almost every pro athlete can touch, like, that's a DB or a receiver can touch 22 miles an hour here. So what we're seeing is like a rise in soft tissue injuries, because what comes with that increase in speed and explosiveness and power is, whether it's down to a hip mobility or a posterior chain dominance or, different issues that come with just being that fast. we're finding that we're having to do a lot more recovery methodology stuff to make sure that these guys are staying on the field compared to, what they used to have to do 20 years ago. You could smoke a cigar, go play a football game, 122 miles an hour, right? But now, athletes on top of elite athleticism, they also got to think about their business post football. Like, football isn't going to last forever. What am I going to do after that? They got to think about life. Rent's more expensive. Like, at the end of the day, on the body, stress is stress. And the stresses that athletes feel in the world nowadays are way higher than the stresses that athletes felt way back when. In the CFL, for example, on the base minimum salary, you go back 20 years ago, on the base minimum, you could get a house deposit within a couple of years on your salary. Here, now you got to play in the CFL 15 years and you might just get a house deposit in Toronto. Maybe. So the stress of life is also causing stress physically. It's manifesting physically. So one of the things we do here at the Argonauts is we have false plates and we have GPS. So we utilize GPS a lot to improve our load management, to make sure that the guys aren't, at the high speeds that they're running. Actually, to give you an example, if you got two cars, right, and they both have a maximum capacity of 1,000 miles, like once they hit 1,000 miles, they're going to be done, right? The car that goes slower is going to require less maintenance, and it's probably going to get there. And then when it's done, cool, whatever, but it hit 1,000 miles per. But the faster car, because it's going faster, is going to require more maintenance. That's just how it is. Because it's going faster, it's going to be more susceptible to crashes and things like that, because it's going faster. And because of that, you need to make sure that the faster car is taken better care of. And that's just the basic principle of this kind of workload management. Athletes are faster nowadays, so we need to take care of it. So one of the things we do is we will get the athletes to jump on a false plate, and we'll put them in about one of four categories based on the way that they jump. So it's not really even about their profile. Sometimes we look at the profile, the rate of force development, concentrically, eccentrically, all of that, the balance, right, left. We look at all of that, but the way you jump actually indicates potentially a risk of injury. So one of the things that we found is hip dominant jumpers. Typically, the ones that when they jump, it looks like a quick hip hinge, and then they go straight into their vertical with minimal knee bend, minimal ankle dorsiflexion. Those are the ones that are typically your fastest on the field and the most explosive, twitchy, whatever you want to give that name. And then the issue with it is that because they're so posterior chain dominant, everything they get is from their posterior chain. So as a result, they're at risk of posterior chain based issues. So we're talking hamstrings, talking groins, hip flexor issues, lack of glute functioning, low back stuff. All the soft tissue injuries typically, or at least in the posterior chain, typically tend to come from individuals that display that type of jump profile. So what we'll do when we see a jump profile like that, I'm giving you one example, but we have plenty of different jump profiles, right? This is probably the most common amongst, and honestly, typically, like males of an African descent. Typically, that's who displays that type of jump profile. What we'll look at is when they jump, we'll then get them to just arms out in front of you, body weight squat. Let's take a look at your ankle mobility. Typically, what happens is the fastest guys on the field don't have a very severe lack of ankle mobility. So when they jumped, it wasn't so much they got into their posterior chain out of want, it was out of necessity. They don't have access to the anterior side of their body. So then what we'll do as an injury prevention strategy is try to give them access to that anterior chain of their body. So we'll do some slightly more quad dominant activities twice a week. We'll do a bunch of ankle mobility. We obviously don't want to do too much because we don't want to take away the reason that they're so fast, right? But we also want to help them stay on the field. So typically what you'll see in an athlete that displays a jump profile like that, let's take a wide receiver, for example, when they jump like that, and then they have a hamstring injury, for example, probably 8 times out of 10, I don't even really need to see the injury to know that it happened while they were decelerating. Because what will happen when a wide receiver runs a dig route, for example, they're running 14, 15 yards up, square cut, but they can't sit down into the break. So what typically happens is the foot goes outside of the center of mass because they can't dorsiflex the ankle, so they can't get the knee over the toe. And when the foot goes outside of the center of mass, the main thing decelerating the body is the hamstring. It's not so much the glute. So as a result, it's taken a beating. So now I've had it throughout my career. We've had hamstring injuries like that. Typically, what we'll do is, on top of teaching them how to get access to the front side of the body, how to break better, stuff like that, we'll also do a bunch of deceleration-based activities where they have to, are necessitated to use the front of their body. And that's one of the ways that we mitigate risk of injury. So it's cool stuff. It's very like techy and stuff like that. But another way that we see that, guys are at risk of injury is when they accelerate, you've got something called a low heel recovery, right? So if you look at a person that accelerates, if I've got my front foot is here and it's on the floor and my back foot is swinging through, when the back foot swings through level with the front during an initial acceleration, that's called a low heel recovery. When the back foot cycles over this one like that, typically what you'll get is a more vertical contact into the ground. So they're not pushing the ground back and away. They're pushing it vertically. But they're also, because of weak hips, they can't pull their leg through like this. Because of weak hips, they've got to shorten the lever. So they bend their knee using the hamstring. Now the hip lever is at a better mechanical advantage. Then they can pull it through really quick, put the foot down. So that's how those guys will accelerate. And they're the same ones that jump like that on a force play, and they're the ones that are at risk of a hamstring injury. So when we look at guys doing that, it red flags it. We give them a profile and we give them accessories to do 2 to 3 times a week. And we're still in the process of refining everything, but that's one of the ways we kind of try to reduce risk of injury. But yeah, fundamentally what we're seeing is, as the world's getting faster and faster, injuries are happening. So we're having to see, not only from a workload management perspective, but also from a movement mechanics perspective. And that's why it helps that I'm an engineer. So, fuck that strength and conditioning coach that told me I needed a kinesiology degree, right? Basically, the biomechanics really play an impact in injury prevention. So we pride ourselves on looking at the biomechanics of the way a guy sprints and then teaching them in the off season. I don't want to make you worse by making you a low heel recovery guy, but I want to give you a little bit of some of it so that you have access to everything you need when you need to use it.
I love that, bucketing those athletes into those archetypes. What are the most common archetypes that you think you see commonly amongst football players? I feel like I've recently been running into that problem, especially with myself, where you see, especially within our sport, with the movement patterns of our sport and everything that's required from us, more so in the weight room with heavy back squatting. Sometimes you see it even in blocking, where it's everything is so extension dominant. What are some other things that you guys kind of implement, or what does that look like when an athlete may come into the program outside of just the force plate stuff, and just looking at jumps, and what would that look like for an athlete? You plugging them into a program based off their archetype and being maybe extension dominant and one of the low anterior.
Right. So yeah, general archetypes that we see is obviously receivers, because they're and DBs, they typically tend to be better at top end speed. We'll see during early acceleration they'll cycle a lot more because they don't utilize force production, they utilize velocity. So that's how they get their initial accel and stuff like that. Typically see the bigger guys, the mids, linebackers, running backs, stuff like that, tend to be the better accelerators, but they need a lot of work on top speed. And as a result of that, they need a higher dosage in the off season of high speed, quick ground contact plyometrics to really make them better at the top speed stuff. We obviously want to retain what they're good at, but give them a little bit of what they're not great at. And then obviously you see the linemen, the O linemen and interior D linemen tend to be the bigger bodies. Obviously we really need to improve the acceleration mechanics a lot of the time, and that's what ends up causing most of the benefit. You tend to see a lot of injuries with those that are based upon contact. So for those guys, it's just preparing them for ground contact in the off season. So rolling drills, stuff like that, that's going to help them have a relationship with the ground effectively. And then, typically more maximal strength. But in terms of archetypes that we see, obviously we can classify, because you got your hybrids, right? You got, not all running backs are power backs. Some of them are scat backs. They're basically wide receivers at the running back position. So the cool thing is obviously we have GPS data, we have force plates that we can, identify and quantify those athletes really what it is we just look at the needs analysis for the position, and then we give them more of that. If you require more unilateral loading, then we're going to give you that. We also look at how the nervous system in the off season responds to the types of loading that we're doing. Typically, my speed guys, wide receivers, DBs, we don't full depth back squat like ever, like literally ever. And the reason we don't is because, limited dorsiflexion is one of them, so it's hard to get into those positions for them. And we can get a full range of motion, hip, ankle strength, whatever, in a different way. We can get that in a Bulgarian split squat without the need for, mobility in a back squat. We get axial loading on the spine, ready for contact, stuff like that, with a box squat. So we can still work maximal strength, but we just do it with a partial range of motion. We'll do full body strength stuff with unilateral movements, typically for the skill guys, and bilateral movements for the guys that are more in the box. But typically, again, it's just based on what the athlete has access to in their body. Because one of the things that was, I learned this through basketball, not through football, but the part of the reason I don't prescribe, full depth back squats really to any position group anymore. And you're not right or wrong to prescribe it. I'm just saying it's the way that I program, right? It's just because limited ankle mobility is highly associated with speed of lateral cut. So if all I do is constantly train your need for ankle mobility, what I may end up doing is actually affecting your ability to stiffen up at the ankle and move laterally. So I don't want to do that, but at the same time, I want to give you enough dosage of ankle mobility that you have access to your entire range of motion that you have. Because we know that injuries happen at the end range of motion of a joint more than the start range of motion, because typically that's when it's the strongest. So we try to do a lot of end range strengthening, functional range conditioning in the hips, obviously for every single individual. We call them football hips, but everyone other than offensive linemen have terrible internal rotation, which ends up leading to like hip flexor, quad-based injuries, adductor groin issues, stuff like that. So that's when we take a look at your internal rotation as an athlete. Obviously, we want you to have a bunch of access to that. But we call it football hips because they're so stiff that they can't get into those internally rotated positions. Their passive range of motion is incredible, but their active range of motion is like 10% of that. So when we see that athletes' passive range of motion is incredible, what we do in terms of range of motion work is try to increase the active range of motion so that there's no more than about a 10-15% deficit to them. But outside of that, if you're immobile in an individual, body part, I got to look at why you are that way and how that potentially increases your performance. Because the last thing I want to do is look at this perfect human performance model, try to change the way you move, and then boom, all of a sudden I've made you more unathletic, because they get paid to be athletic. So we got to be really careful about, what we're prescribing. What we'll do is we'll do what's called a reactive strength index test once a week in the off season, at least, sometimes twice a week, just to see how their nervous system is responding to the work that we're putting them through. Other tests that we'll do is something called a dynamic strength index for athletes. That's really where we figure out what dosage of power we need to put. We'll also do a dynamic strength index at different points of the off season, and that's basically to figure out if your maximal force production as an athlete is here. Obviously, we know power and speed are the name of the game, and your maximal force production during a high velocity movement, so something with a time constraint like a jump, is here. Well, this is your deficit, and this is the thing stopping you from accessing that at higher speeds. So if this is your deficit, we've got to do more maximal velocity stuff. If you're all the way here, I know that maybe your strength is limiting you, so we got to do more maximal strength stuff to raise the roof. But effectively, we use that dynamic strength index to figure out where an athlete is at, and how we can make them better and bridge that gap between how much force they can produce versus how much of that they have access to at speed.
Are you guys using like a drop jump on the force plate for that RSI?
For the RSI, we're actually just using a basic 4-hop test on a jump mat. So and we're just using ankle stiffness as a measure, because if we do like a drop jump a couple times in a week, sometimes we found that it ends up taking away from the training. So we can do that little test. The guys buy into it. They know it's not super fatiguing, but we're using that to basically measure central nervous system activity and also recovery. It helps me keep them accountable to the amount of sleep that they've been having too.
So like all of this, like you're taking all this data, you're taking all this stuff, looking at your athletes and whatnot. Where, like, what coaches are you looking up to and learning from in the industry to help, like, you also as a coach improve?
For sure. So there's actually a couple, to be honest with you, right now. For speed stuff, Les Spellman is an incredible resource for speed stuff. There's also Speedworks training out of the UK. They're incredible for speed stuff as well. Really great in terms of like just breaking down the simplicity of speed and how you need to train it. They're two resources that I've been using for the longest time. I got to give a huge shout out because this is someone that I've been following for a very long time. I was following him when I was an athlete, and now he's a brother of mine. It's Overtime Athletes, Chris Barnard. Huge for not only programming. If you ever get a chance to go down to Overtime Athletes down in St. Petersburg, I recommend you go down there and see the great work that they're doing, because one thing about him, he's a big culture guy too. He breaks things down in a very simplistic way that you can understand and become more athletic. And even though he's got such a huge following on social media, he takes an absolute no bullshit approach. Like the things that he says are the things that he does. He's not posting shit on Instagram so you can see it and then, go and mimic it, but that's not what he's doing with his athletes. Everything he's showing you is what he's doing with his athletes, and it works. The product is in, you can see it there. He trains Marquez Valdez-Scantling, trains a couple of the other NFL dudes, trains a couple of CFL guys too. We go down to Tampa every year and just hang out with him and learn from him. So he's a great resource, especially for combine training. Like incredible resource. For the sports science stuff, honestly, a lot of it initially came from a necessity in it. When we brought on, force plate and GPS stuff, it was at a time where we have a sports scientist now, and he's incredible, like unbelievable at what he does. His name's Chris Robertson. You should look him up. Like the brain on this dude is incredible. So all of this profiling, everything like that, he's really just taking it to the next level. But initially, when I started doing this for the Argos, it was just really a lot of reading research papers. Like, what does the research say on this kind of stuff? What does the research say about biomechanics when it comes to sprinting and injury? What does the research say about percentage of weight on a sled when it comes to improving acceleration? What does the research say about any of the stuff that you think you need to train? I guarantee you there's probably research on, because 90% of the stuff that improves athleticism is already out there. It's readily available. So doing your research is really important. You'll notice how I didn't fucking once say I got any of this from Instagram. I didn't, because that's a poor resource to get your information from. I'll get the idea from Instagram, and then I'll get the research from research or working with colleagues in the field.
And a lot of people ain't trying to hear that. They're trying to go straight to IG, whatever little bits and pieces I can take from there. That's what I'm rolling with. And now I'm a strength and conditioning coach.
Brother, it is crazy out here. It's really wild. But like, look, at the end of the day, like I know people got to feed their family, right? So I don't knock the hustle of anybody that's using Instagram as a way to, promote, as the way to coach. You go ahead and do what you do. My message to those individuals be, please be careful and be acutely aware of who it is that you're affecting. Because although you may have a great intention behind what you're doing, if your message is received in the wrong way, I guarantee every message that you send on social media will have some of a negative impact, because people only watch the first 30 seconds of your video anyway. But just understand, what is the most harm I could do from posting this right now? If the most harm is severely detrimental to an athlete's mental or physical health, maybe don't post it. If it's, can be taken the wrong way and out of context, all right, it is what it is. That's just the nature of the game. And then my advice to athletes looking on IG, I use the car example. If you got 1,000 miles in you, but every 30 miles, I know you don't fill up the gas tank every 30 miles. Man, one time you're filling up with 87% octane, next you're filling it with 95. Shit, now you're filling it with diesel. Bro, your car is not making it to that 1,000 miles. It's not making it because you don't even know what to put in it. So the first thing is read the manufacturing label, man. Understand what you need to put in your tank first and foremost. Keep making deposits that way, and you'll get to your destination. This stuff ain't free, man. Like, it's not free and it's not easy. Like, if you think it's free and you think it's easy, go to IG, do the workouts, whatever. But the only way to improve your jump is to jump. The only way to improve your sprint is to sprint. The only way to improve your strength is to do strength training. Like, that's really how basic it gets.
As simple as that. And you also talked about feeding the family. What is that all about? You know what I mean? Because you got your clothing brand, FTF, Feed the Fam. Where did that start? How did you get going on that? And what is it all about?
Yeah, so FTF it stands for Feed the Fam. Me and my boy Kian, when we were doing this combine training, I mean, you guys know, you've been through the process. The combine training grind it's a grind, man. Like, it's like no other. It's different. It hurts your body. You're preparing for these tests that, I can very comfortably say, I would say a large majority of them don't give you any indication of what this athlete's going to be like at the pro level. But you have to jump through those hoops. It is what it is. That's what the league mandates. That's what you got to do. So it's a grind, 3-hour workouts. You're eating the same meal day in, day out to try to make sure your body composition is right. You're sleeping same time, day in, day out. You don't have any fun. Like, it's a grind. But you have to have a purpose for why you do it. Because if you don't have a purpose for why you do it, you're just going to be training. And on top of that, when you don't have a purpose for what you do, it's really easy to question your process. To question, hey, is what I'm doing right? I'm not seeing the results. Is the food I'm eating right? I'm not seeing the results. If you understood the process, you had a good intention behind the process, and you keep attacking it day in, day out, eventually you'll get to exactly where you need to be. It just takes time. But the Feed the Fam came from, we were benching one day, and, it was just, it was a tough workout. Neither of us wanted to be there. We've been there for a long time. Last workout of the day. And just out of nowhere, before he was about to do a set, I said, come on, man, feed your family with this. And we kind of both like looked at each other and we were like, yo, I like that, man. And it just basically became our mantra that, like, hey, man, when I'm doing work, I'm not doing it for me. I'm trying to feed my family. Like, at the end of the day, you ask any one of the great coaches out here in this building right now, they do it, yes, because they love football and whatever. But the fundamental reason they work so hard is because they are desperate to create a good life for the people around them. Like, desperate. So for us, it became that mantra. It was feed the fam, man. Anything you're doing, feed the fam. You need to go to bed early because you've got to get up early. Feed the fam. The decision that you're making to go out clubbing or whatever, the decision that you're making out to stay on the game for an extra hour or an extra game or whatever, that decision is not feeding your family. And 10 years down the line, you're going to wish you didn't make that decision. So feed your family right now. Make that decision right now. And that's basically what the brand embodies. It's a great quality material. The quality of merchandise nowadays has shot down because everybody's looking for the cheapest, most easiest way to manufacture their goods. We're not. Our merchandise is always going to be great quality. It's going to be that hoodie that, you know how vintage is popular now? Like, I have a Steelers hoodie that was made in 1995 and it's still, like, beautiful. And it's because back then they used to make great quality stuff. Right now they don't. They make it cheap and cheerful and quick. So I'll go with the brand was to embody what we're trying to do. It's intentional effort behind what we do, even in the clothes that we make.
Fuck yeah, I love that. Hey, that's dope right there. So if y'all listeners out there, go ahead and check out Feed the Fam. That's only if you're about that action, right? Don't go ahead and start buying Feed the Fam if you're just out there trying to bullshit. But if you really out there trying to feed the fam, go ahead and tap into that. But we're going to get into our last segment now, man. It's a 90-second round. Right. 1-word answers, right? So it's about 10 questions. Are you ready for it?
Okay, so I can only answer with one word. Huh?
1 word, that's it.
Say less, man. Let's go.
All right, here we go. 90 seconds on the clock. Favorite post-workout snack?
Protein shake.
Best coach you've ever had.
Oh, Dinwiddie.
What position group trains the hardest in the weight room and on the field?
Ooh.
Linebackers.
Pizza or burger?
Burger.
Do you prefer off-season or in-season training?
Off season.
Top athlete you've ever trained.
Kean Schaefer Baker.
Your favorite exercise.
A barbell step up.
Which do you prefer, a good sprint session or a heavy weightlifting session?
Good sprint session any day of the week.
Best gym you've ever been to.
Overtime athletes.
Would you rather skydive blindfolded or swim into a cave that you don't know where it ends?
Skydive blindfolded.
And that is it, bro. Usama, I appreciate you coming on, bro. And thank you for all the knowledge that you dropped. Listeners, again, feed the fam. It's a real brand. It's out there, right? Don't join. Don't buy the brand if you ain't out there trying to feed the fam. And check out my boy Usama out there doing great work for the Argos, but also just working with pro athletes across the board. So if you guys got an opportunity to check him out, go ahead and do that. And thank you, man, for being here today.
No, I appreciate it very much. Hey, just so you know, the Feed the Fam merch is only made to order, so you got to request it. We don't just give you it.
Hey, there it is. And we're out.